counselors. We're missing a Roth. So time for the open forum. We'll open the open forum. There's nobody here. Close the open forum. Moving on to the consent agenda. So we have the typical 3 things on the consent agenda, and then, just like we did last year, we had the fish pick bingo permit from the Sons of the American Legion. If you look through that, you'll see that it is very much in the same order as it was last year. Unless somebody would like to pull something for discussion, then I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll make that motion.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Ooh, who got it?
Can't.
I think you
He
raised,
said second. I said,
you raised your hand or something.
I started with I will.
Okay, so a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right. So we got a little note from Todd Miller asking about the Grand Marais Music Collective, their little shindig that they do. Asking if we would consider donating porta potties for the Stars of the North Music Festival, and there's 3 of us that were here when he did this last year. I'm wondering if you guys remember better than I do what we told him about, because I think there were some conditions, weren't there, about like we said we would, because we gave him like $400 or something like that, 400 $500 last year, or $700 or something for porta potties.
I don't remember that we gave him any money.
No, we didn't give him money.
Did we just take care of some porta potties then?
Yeah.
I thought that we attached something to it, something like, well, if this is going to be a sustainable thing, then you got to take care of this.
Would that be in your minutes last year?
Well, it probably would be, yes.
Find it?
I don't think I can find it that fast.
Are the council minutes not on the website from last year?
They are.
End of July?
I'm saying that
Early
my
July?
ability to find them is
Oh.
probably not very fast.
You're good on that thing.
I'm good on that thing, but I'm not that good.
Look at see.
No, it wouldn't be that one. It'd be really earlier than that. Well, maybe it would. Okay. This is tons of fun for those people watching.
As compared to usual.
Shut up. Yeah, totally.
Don't tell me I made you work.
So this is all McGough stuff.
Okay.
Wow, look at us being technological. I don't see it.
Maybe search
Well, this is, see, the
collaborative.
27th,
or-
28th, 29th, so try the end of June.
In June?
Yeah, because this is for July, so you wouldn't have done anything in August on it, right?
Oh, I suppose.
Was it called Stars of the North Music Festival last year?
Yeah, it was.
Then search Stars of the North.
Can you search that on the webpage?
Up in that corner search.
Right here? $50 documents.
Oh,
May 26, 2010.
okay,
2010,
that's not good.
wow.
Yeah. I don't know if we're going to find
No,
it.
so we don't know. Well, we tried.
This is a valiant effort. I was impressed we got that far. I don't know if that one actually, I don't know if that one was actually an agenda item or if that was something that he came and asked us to talk about. But anyway, the conversation is about whether or not we're willing to donate some porta potties.
Do we know the cost, or where are they put? Are they located right in Harbor Park?
I don't remember. They cannot be in Harbor Park. They were probably more like Boulder Park or
I think they were like between Blue Water and Sievertson's, or between Blue Water and the Trading Post. If I remember correctly, I think that's where they were located.
Yep, that empty lot.
We met empty
Yep.
lot there.
Do we know how many he's asking for?
I think there were 3 last year.
Are there 3 sitting there right now? Or have they been moved? There were 3 there not too long ago because I noticed one of them was pink and went, ooh,
Out at the point?
no, right
Well, there's 3.
between.
Yeah,
There's 3 of them
between-
right by Blue Water.
Yeah.
on the back
Yeah.
wall of Blue
Yeah.
Water. Yeah.
But is he asking for something else? I mean, those are going to be there all summer.
Yeah.
And those city has those porta potties. there for an entire season. It's not for, they're not there just for a specific event.
Well, do we know, okay, so
25th would be your next.
25th is our next meeting. He's asking for him for the 27th, 28th, 29th. He also says he's gonna give us an update on the youth music lesson program.
And no one's here.
Nobody's here.
We ran into this last time with the Legion and everything. If people are not here and their description really is not what we need, I kind of think we need to table it and let them come back to us.
Seems reasonable.
If it's
I mean,
important to them, you know, to stop in for a few minutes and talk with us about it, whoever it may be.
Or at least spell out more of the details of
Yeah.
what they're asking for. We do have porta potties downtown. Are they asking for more than that?
Oh,
in a
hey, here
specific
he is.
location?
Hot damn.
Well,
Darn.
Hot darn. No, it doesn't make any sense. Hey, we were just talking about you.
Diggity day.
Come up to the table.
Right now?
Yes.
Yep, we were just talking about you. We were just about to table this thing, so you're lucky that we got here.
Sorry about that. I got waited.
All right, so what do you want? You're looking at porta potties. There's 3 of them on the backside of Blue Water right now.
If you think that'll do. I think we left the judgment of how many there should be up to G&G last year. And I think we had more than that, but we didn't have huge crowds. We had a good steady showing. But so
Were
every
they
little bit
there?
helps.
Were they at that spot between the Blue Water and Severtson's last year, or were they over in?
No, they were much
Park?
closer. They were over in the park. Yeah, I'm sorry to address that specific issue. It's a little far because there's going to be a beer garden there. And so I don't know. I think people will still make it, but
Tell them to plan ahead.
yeah. Ideally they'd probably. Last year where they sat was in the street, backed up to the curb, kind of like opposite from the trading post. Yeah, and there were a lot of them. I think there were like 6 or 8 or 9 because they were going to just leave them there for fish pick or something. It was sort of part of that sort of deal where they were going to extend that. And well, I appreciate everything. You know, in full disclosure, last year you said it was a one-time thing, and but I thought, well, I'll be persistent anyway and ask. Every little bit helps because our budget isn't big at all. I think our total net from last year's efforts, and this is the efforts of 15, 20 people working pretty hard, was probably about $2,500. And so you can see how the cost of porta potties figures into that pretty heavily. We've had, and this is the update portion, we've had between 3 and 4 instructors working throughout the course of the winter and the spring and the summer now, teaching everything from saxophone to trumpet to keyboard to guitar. And right now I believe we have about 5 students running, and I think we could have quite a few more as we grow the program. And we did receive grants from a few different sources, and those were very appreciated. We'll be getting reports back to them. And we're all set up to do it again here, 27th, 28th, and 29th. We have a full roster. The posters are in the mail on their way to us now. T-shirts, Jonathan did. They're coming. And today we received about 5 more donations from area businesses for items for the raffle. And it's the raffle tickets where we make our money for the program. It's the raffle tickets are $5 a piece, or 5 for 20. And then we set up a variety of prizes in which we kind of group together the different things that people can compete for, raffle for. And that's basically it. I think we have about, I didn't count the total number of acts, you know. I'm going to say there's about 15 different acts right now. The vast majority are local. Generally speaking, it's much more feasible and for us more rewarding to hire local acts. We have a great music scene here. But also when you bring in an out-of-town act, no matter how great they are and how much they can contribute, you still got to find lodging, and you still have to pay them respectably. And it's a lot for them to do to get all the way up here and play. Jerry Levine will be doing sound again this year, so it'll be a professional sound system. We'll have the same food vendor, the same food truck, which just one, which will be serving a variety of things from the menu. We're not growing this year. I don't think any of us had the energy. We've been too busy to try and be more ambitious and to grow the concert. And I don't know if growing it even benefits the program all that much.
Mhm.
Our program is pretty small. In time, if we grow it, fine, but we're gonna have to have our reasons for doing so. But it's an open-air festival, people can come and go. There's no ticket charge. So we're only doing it through the raffle tickets and any other direct donations that people can make right there on the spot, or grants that we can get throughout the course of the year. Grand Marais will be hosting the beer garden again. We'll be putting up the same kind of fence that we did before. And it will be beer and wine. And we didn't have wine last year. So if you didn't like beer, you were out. And one thing we'd like to figure out, we don't have much time left, is if there's any way to combine that blue tarp with the big blue tent with the beer garden, because the sun was just punishing last year. It was like being in the Caribbean. It was the hot weekend of the year, and there was just no escaping it. And people were sneaking out of the beer, trying to sneak out of the beer garden to get into that shade.
Clear.
You know, and we had to keep stopping them, and I felt like we were being cruel. You know, but
It's something you stay here and cook with your beer.
yeah, that's right. You enjoy that beer.
So that would be a conversation to bring up with the park board and with
Okay.
Dave, because that's
I already sent them a message on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it only anchors in one place, and the beer garden kind of wants to be somewhere else. And so maybe if we move the beer garden to where that tent is anchored, then you're blocking one entrance to the park.
Yep.
There's more than one entrance, but that's the main one.
Right.
So
Okay, so I'm going to pivot back to the
Sure.
porta potties. So for Fish Pick, does the Lions Club pay for the porta potties that they have up there?
They pay for the extras.
For the extra ones?
Yeah.
That's what I was afraid of.
there's extra ones.
Well, I mean, for like
They,
the
they
6
bring
or
in
8.
extra ones for Fisherman's Picnic.
Okay. I mean, other than the ones that maybe the city normally has in place.
Right.
Mhm.
Could I ask that we maybe just move those ones to a closer proximity and then move them back? Those few that are standard?
Well, I mean, you said that last year there were ones that were down in that location, you know, and were they there for the whole time of Fisherman's Picnic? I don't recall whether they were or weren't. It seems to me that they put,
The only ones I
So-
remember were the ones actually right across from, if there were some on those empty lots, I wasn't aware of it. But the only ones I remember are the ones that were across the street from the trading post up against the curb. I'm not sure if that's what you're saying.
I don't know if those, I was trying to think, because don't they always just stack up with food trucks along there? I don't feel like there was bathrooms there during Fish Pick.
I think there were farther down.
Okay.
I think there were just a couple of them though. Because usually it's the corn dog guy and the
Well,
cheese
Yeah.
curd.
I don't even come down, we come down one night and grab Chinese and go home. So
Foot long egg roll, man.
I
Yeah,
can hear all the music on my front porch,
there's
so I'm
usually a corn
good.
dog truck right around there somewhere. I always hit that one.
those mini donuts. Gotta have them.
Yes.
Well, our food vendor guy comes. He's also here for Fish Pick, and he gets a spot in the park and stays the entire time. And but for our event, what we try and do to create sort of a sense of containment is we sort of circle the wagons around the stage. So we bring an Airstream trailer down, which becomes our fundraising office, and that was a lifesaver last year for the awning in the shade. And that's where we sell T-shirts too. So that's where we sell the T-shirts and encourage people for the raffle. And then after that is the food truck. And then after that is the sound guy and his awning. And then after that was the blue tent.
Mhm.
Then after that was the beer garden. It kind of created a nice sense of containment. There were times when the number of people that attended filled it. And there were times when they didn't.
Right.
You know, one of the difficulties I have with this is that we require the other nonprofits that have festivals and events to provide their own facilities, I mean, porta potties or waste disposal for their vendors and that kind of stuff. And when we start to give one group a kind of a free ride,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it starts to look like we're favoring one group over another. And you know what, you know, the work that the Lions have done for Fisherman's Picnic and what the Art Colony has done, you know, with their art festival and that too. And I mean, I know you're a small organization and, you know, don't have a lot of resources behind you, but I'm wondering if, if there's a way that you might even be able to work with the Lions to get them to put those
That's what I was thinking.
extra porta potties out
A little early.
just a little bit early. I mean,
I could definitely call them. We do work with them with the stage. We all get together and set up the stage
mhm.
and take it down.
I mean, I think it'd be beneficial to have some extra porta potties, you know,
Mhm.
close to the venue. I mean,
If
Do you
I-
know how much it costs to get a porta potty? I
Well,
mean, like,
it's the, I know,
you know how much it costs.
yeah. I mean, it's the upfront, the ongoing maintenance side of it isn't as much as like what the initial,
The delivery.
so if it was, you know, because of your weekend, if it was one or two more trips down to pump, you know, I don't know if it would be that much of a burden, whereas if you guys got them, had to pay for that, the pumping during the thing and pull them away and then, you know, I mean, in some ways it's just, I don't know exactly what it would be, I mean, depending on how many there are, but, you know, service, is- yeah, I don't think it would add that much, I mean, it would be a simple ask, I guess, of them.
We talking a couple $100 probably, or?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if you added, yeah, to what it would add, you know, again, those extra servicings. And of course, I only look at it in like a single unit on a job site, not bunches of them where they're getting
Right.
serviced at least once a day, right? I mean, we're weeks in between, so. You know, I mean, I don't know, maybe that would be a question to call Petey and ask him
Sure.
that question. And so that you could call Lions and say like, hey, would you be willing to, you know, it would be X, you know, $300 or $200 on top. Would you guys be willing to help us out and just get them down there early?
It's also the week between our event and the Lions, which they would probably be standing out there
I'm sure.
and benefiting the city.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a three-way partnership that we could talk about. Something like that, because it becomes part of the city's infrastructure for those days between events. I'm just reaching for anything here.
Well,
Seek a local business to sponsor bathrooms for the event and get some shout outs on the stage.
That could happen. Yeah.
mhm.
We haven't
I was
bumping them lately.
one step ahead of you on that one,
Mhm.
but,
Jay's stepping up, that's what he's saying.
Mhm.
so I'm inclined to say, to honor what we said last year with it was a one-time thing.
Mhm.
I do think that all this conversation is really constructive, and I do think there are ways you can get efficiencies in working with the Lions and working with that infrastructure. You know, and I agree. I don't know who said it would be kind of an easy ask, but I do think that opens up, you know, an opportunity for you to get some more donations. Of course, your donations then going towards paying more expenses doesn't really help the organization,
Mhm.
but I feel like I have to agree with Tim on that, you know, if we require it of one group, then I think that we've got to be consistent with that. But I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts or any other feelings about that. But we can certainly look into certain efficiencies that can go into that. So, thoughts?
It's kind of insane.
Yeah.
I mean, we have another meeting before the festival, so
Yeah.
could be brought back if we could
Sure.
have a conversation with the Lions and
You bet.
talk to
I can bring a report back to you.
talk to Pete
Let you know what we
and
did.
find out kind of what,
What we're looking at?
yeah.
Sure.
And even if you're busy with getting stuff together for it, because that would be like, well, it'd be a few days before you'd be.
It'll be a few days before.
But, I mean, even a message into Mike, an email that would kind of update us on if there was a solution
Sure.
or what, or if you found somebody else to help out on it,
Sure.
you know, so.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I think identifying what the cost is, you know, what that would be and how many you think you'd need, and see if there's a solution.
Yeah, I can check with Pete to ask how many we had last year and how badly did they need pumping and how, get a report back from him as well.
Yeah.
I think that'll be a really helpful information.
Yeah, and I understand that it was a one-time deal last year, but I also felt I needed to come back and see anything we can try and do.
Another one-time deal?
Yeah. Really, this is the last time. But,
Be careful.
Until the next time.
but maybe there's some creative solutions here. You can count on us to definitely work every angle that we can try and to pull that off. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, cool. Well, and thanks for the update on
Sure.
on what's happening. I mean, it's exciting to see, and it's been fun to follow some of the media that you've been throwing out there. You've been getting some instruments donated
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, which is pretty exciting because that's a gateway for a kid, for a
Yes.
young person to acknowledge their need of music in their life.
It's
So-
a changing time for music. It's hard to know what kids even really want to do, musically. We don't have the same stimulus that we had when we were growing up. We don't have the same influences. Things are changing. So obviously the benefit of learning and playing music and performing is self-evident. And in Grand Marais, it's always been very important.
Mhm.
And if you're one of the few people in town who knows anything about baritone sax. So if you want to drop by and just look at this thing that we got, I look at it and I don't even know where to handle it. But it's an amazing thing.
I used to work on them too, so
Oh,
I
really?
could probably tell you what work it needs.
This has a Canadian dime on one spot where it's a finger.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It's been held together. It's seen some use, but, well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, guys.
And you can stick around, because the next discussion item is going to be code enforcement for trailers parked.
For trailer park?
No, for trailers parked.
Oh, I'll listen. I'll
Yeah,
sit, yeah.
because you were participating in the conversation at the planning commission, and I'd be interested in hearing what we have to say.
So, on this topic, so the next thing is the parking of trailers, i.e. campers. Our code book calls it trailers, campers, and motorhomes. In our last conversation, Councilor Steckelberg mentioned that he had gone for a little zip around town and had counted the number of campers that were non-compliant and found that to be in the neighborhood of 30, 31, something like that. And I heard over the last couple of weeks numerous times from people around town who had watched that or who had heard that number and were just kind of like, well, what are you guys going to do about that? And it's like, I don't know, we're talking about it at the next meeting. So Kim passed out to you a copy of the actual language in the city code. And a couple of interesting things here. So the definition is pretty straightforward. The penalty is a misdemeanor.
Petty misdemeanor.
Petty misdemeanor. And it's it is what it is. It doesn't really go into too much detail, but it's an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, and at the planning commission meeting, we discussed this for a significant amount of time. But I think after the conversation had kind of gone around and we came to some conclusions, we felt that bringing the issue to the planning commission seemed like it was not in our realm to address the issue of enforcement of the ordinance. The ordinance exists. There's an enforcement mechanism. If there's a question about the adequacy of the ordinance, that's not something that the planning commission felt that we were charged to address or look at. There was a complaint by an individual raising the question about whether the city was going to enforce the ordinance, and which their neighbor was in violation of, obviously. And again, the planning commission felt that was a city council, more policy directive than an issue of the planning commission in terms of dealing with the ordinance and enforcement mechanisms. I don't know if, Todd, you have anything to add to that, but I think it seemed that's pretty much my take from that conversation.
The letter that came in and the concern from the member of the community was that there didn't seem to be a pathway to enforcement of an existing zoning ordinance, which I find confusing personally, and I think we have to be really careful that if we don't enforce one zoning ordinance, what about the rest? And do all our zoning ordinances become paper tigers? And do people, I'm exaggerating here, but do people just start running free with whatever they want? You know, once perhaps, you know, the city loses its authority or its perception of power on these things, it can be a pretty slippery slope. And so I have a lot of questions around these issues, but I thought it was more of a city council level discussion. But those questions are just, what is the role of the sheriff's department? Do we employ them in any way to enforce these things? I thought we did. What is the result of a misdemeanor? Is there a fine for violating an ordinance? If so, what is the method for generating that fine? And if we do have a really widespread problem with RV parking here, there, and everywhere, then that's not a result of the community saying this is what it wants to do. It's probably more a result of the lack of enforcement. There's been no discussion saying this is how we want Grand Marais to go.
Mhm.
We want Grand Marais to have RVs everywhere in the streets.
And I think that's where the planning commission felt it was more of the city council's, game to address that issue of whether or not the community feels that there should be some different type of regulation, or whether the existing regulation should stand and be enforced in some fashion.
Mhm.
I mean, right now, there has been no enforcement. There are obviously multiple violations out there other than the one that was specifically brought to our attention.
And not just concerning this issue, you know, like there are I would dare say hundreds of violations of the city code.
City code, yes.
Within, you know, just visible, like blatantly visible.
Well, and I think that we need to make sure we're clear that it's not just the zoning ordinance, it's the entire city code in
Mhm.
terms of how that's enforced. And, you know, I mean, I certainly understand, you know, the issues of enforcement and the challenges that go along with that. But I think as people have said, you know, if we have these regulations and don't do enforcement, then what's the message that
Right.
we're sending? If we don't enforce it, and we don't enforce it because we just don't have the staffing to do that, that's a question that I think we need to address and deal with.
That's a choice that we're taking, yeah.
Well, if we create a list of priorities for our staff, and this priority is down here and other priorities are up here, I can tell you, enforcement is always gonna kind of start to fall to the lower echelons, because there's always something more important and more pressing and, you know, of kind of greater magnitude. But the fact is that even small enforcement, responsibilities exist and need to be addressed. Otherwise, people will do what they want. And
So if I understand this, are we saying that people cannot have an RV motor, or an RV, a fifth wheel trailer, a travel trailer parked on their property,
no,
No.
stored?
In the front yard.
In the front yard.
anything other than the rear
Has to
yard,
be
a garage
like-
or a rear yard.
Yeah, garage or rear yard, it says.
Where is that in here?
It's on under the parking.
42.30.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's the overnight parking, which talks about those that aren't even on the property, but are just parked out
On the street, yeah.
What-
Which I've noticed, I mean, I have to say, it kind of bugs me. I've noticed in the past couple of weeks, tons of that, where people are just parking on side streets, or even parking. There was somebody who like pretty blatantly camped right next to the co-op here for like 2 or 3 nights last week.
I saw that.
There was one who camped right on Wisconsin Street. Like, the RV was there when I went home at night at 8 o'clock, and it was in the same exact place with the shades drawn when I went past in the morning at 6:30. And it was, you know, it was just kind of like, come on!
Well, I think there's that, like occupied overnight parking in like areas where it's not allowed.
Mhm.
But then even just, you know, people that have them and don't maybe have a driveway or don't
Right,
have a
so they
spot
leave
in
them
their
on the
yard
street.
or in their back of
Yeah.
their house for it, so they park them on the street.
Right, and there's several issues, several different issues like that can go.
Well, can I?
Go ahead.
I mean, to me, I feel like the simple thing to do would be to, I mean, if Jonathan went around and, I mean, not to be, and that's not really Jonathan's role, but if just a very cursory glance can identify, and you know which residents they're associated with, letters. I mean, similar to when there was the whole vacation rental in the R1 and R2 zone. I mean, it wasn't like those people all of a sudden had to go to court or they got a ticket.
Mhm.
It was more of a, hey, because I feel like Mike's response often, would be, which I guess makes sense, and I think it is the right approach, like, hey, go talk to your neighbor. Like if you have a problem with it, go talk to your neighbor. But it's not really, if you do that and you don't get a response,
Right.
I mean, and ultimately it shouldn't be that, right? I mean, we all have done probably something that, I mean, I have not read through the entire city code, so I'm sure, you know what I mean? Like, we all
Well-
can find things, but if it's something like that, what would it take to just do a letter to say, hey, we noticed that this, and here is what the ordinance says, and give some sort of timeline, or, we welcome your feedback, and if you feel like it's a change that needs to happen, then actually come and talk to us, right? But this is the way it is, right? If there's a change that people want to see, then I don't see any reason why we should change it. I think that it's probably annoying, if the street sweepers are out or whatever, and there's a 40-foot RV parked always in the same place, yeah, it would be as simple as a letter out to ask, and then again, you 2 weeks later or whatever that timeline is, that resolution's you asking somebody to find that solution, then
Follow up.
you call Pat, right? I mean, call the sheriff's department. I mean, it is an ordinance, and it is.
It's not quite that simple, though, just to say call the sheriff, because the sheriff may decide that it's not, on their priority list either. I mean, I think you have to decide once you start into an enforcement process, what the outcome you want to achieve is. And if you send a letter, requesting compliance and letting people know that they're in violation, and they still don't comply, then becomes a matter of the city then pursuing legal channels and using the county attorney's office to file charges against somebody. And it becomes a time-consuming and complicated process. And so, I completely sympathize with Mike when he says, I just don't have the time to spend doing that kind of thing. But if we have ordinances that people are,
Blatantly.
violating
Violating.
the vacation rental was, I think we kind of nipped that in the bud when it was started, and, here this situation has existed for a long time, and people have kind of grown into, feeling like, well, nobody ever cared, nobody's ever said anything,
Yeah, so
and
then we
now
can get away.
all of a sudden you're going to come after us, and you're going to have, I think you'll have resistance, and which means then how much effort does the city want to spend in bringing around, compliance,
Mhm.
Right. Sean, I'm sorry, I know I'm not officially part of this, but has this existed to this level for a long time? I'm noticing it this year for the first time. I've never seen so many RVs parked around.
I think it has been on the uptick. I mean, I've lived in my house for 5 years, and in my neighborhood, I've seen a couple more pop up in the last couple of years. So I mean, I definitely think that it's on the uptick.
The other thing too is, and you're having this broader discussion about, well, if we're going to have enforcement, what's that going to look like? We're going to hire a code enforcement officer?
Well,
I don't think people want that, but we do have a very specific petitioner approaching us right now saying they have a problem with their neighbor.
Mhm.
We do not have anyone coming to us saying, let's change the ordinance to make this allowed. And so there is an acute problem, and my only advice would be, let's deal with that first. And then if we get a public petition saying change the rules, then we'll change the rules.
Yeah, and I haven't heard anybody in the council suggest that we're changing the rules is something that we want to pursue. I mean, maybe that's an option, but
I would hope there was an efficient, inexpensive way to use the resources that you currently have to enforce the ordinances you currently have, which may be, you know, a series of letters from Mike, and followed by advice from the city attorney on how to enforce punitive measures, and maybe some clarification of what the sheriff's role is in our relationship with them, with a vehicle on the street like that.
I've talked to Pat about this, and I've done a little bit of research into like what the city's options are, and it really gets into legal murkiness really quickly, because when the city disbanded the municipal police force, you know, 15, 16, 17 years ago, or however long ago it was, we basically removed the ability of the city from actually pursuing any kind of civil penalties against people who broke city code, because then we gave that right over to, and that job over to the sheriff. So then if we wanted to do that again, we would have to start up having municipal infractions or municipal tickets, which would then be something that this body, the city council body, we would have to be the appeals court for that, basically, because you can't have municipal tickets or any kind of legal penalties, whether civil or criminal, without having the ability to appeal it. And when I talked to Mike about this was a couple of years ago, because I've been talking to Mike about recodifying the city code since I got elected. And I do think that this is a symptom of a problem that we need to take a closer look at, which is recodifying the city code. And that would involve taking a look at the priorities that the council has and the priorities that the community has for the standard of living that we want the ordinance to create, or that we want the code to create. But when I talked to Mike about municipal infractions and all of that, he was like, you know, all of that would fall on the city, on the council and on the administration to process the appeals, and then for us to hear them all. And so, you know, if we're talking about 31 people in our community who have campers in their front yard, and we're talking about hearing appeals from 27 of those 31, you know, then that's, you know, we're talking about 6-hour council meetings and, you know, or more, because we have, you know, they have to get their legal rights. So the way that we're looking at it now, the way we do it right now is that the sheriff is the guy, and if someone has a complaint, like if a citizen has a complaint, they call the sheriff, and then the sheriff can follow up on it however he and his staff deem is responsible. And that could involve issuing a ticket, that could involve just giving a warning. That's up to the sheriff. Now, if the city steps in and is the one who is starting to be the, you know, the
Petitioner?
the petitioner, thank you, then that changes the dynamic a bit, and also changes some of the realities of how we deal with that in the legal system, because then the city has to be the one defending that. You know, we have to be the one who's there saying, this is what we found, this is what the problem is, this is what the ordinance says, ta-da. And you know, and I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that, but I do see that there's a precedent to start, if we start enforcing part of the code but not all the code, then we're basically telling the city, like, straight out, guess what, we're going to be enforcing the entire code, so you better be ready to get some letters from us.
Well, I was gonna say, how do we pick just one thing? Because there's more things that people are gonna keep coming and going, okay, here's one, I got a question about this, what does this say? Okay, I don't like that, or here's this. Now, where do we,
I think it all points to recodifying the city code, honestly, and seeing what the priorities of the city, of the city council and the priorities of the city community is for what life should look like here and how we can actually realistically enforce it.
Talk
I-
about 6-hour council meetings.
Well, I'm talking about work sessions with party subs. But I spoke with the person who started this conversation, and they told me that they aren't going to call the sheriff on the neighbor because they're concerned about the dynamic in the neighborhood, and that is the consequence of having it be, it's still anonymous to a certain extent, but that's a real deterrent from actually having someone take up their desire to have, the code enforced in an appropriate way to benefit them. So all of that is not, is not really for or against taking action on this, but I think it is some pretty decent background information to consider when we're looking at how to move forward with something like this.
Well, what you're saying then is moving this conversation to a much higher level of conversation about city code in general, not just the specific section of the city code and how it's enforced, but city code enforcement on a broader scale.
Yeah, and like what's our philosophy of enforcement? Like how are we actually going to choose what's enforceable and what's not enforceable, and how are we going to write the code so that it matches it? In my perspective, we have been setting ourselves up for this over the past several years because we did this awesome community engagement to put together a comprehensive plan. We've put together a comprehensive plan that we're still vetting. Once we get that comprehensive plan in place, then that will have the values and the goals of the city, which then we can apply to the city code, which once we have the city code all figured out, then we can talk to the sheriff and we can tell him this is what we want to have enforced and this is how we want to have it enforced, and then we can have a more holistic solution to this. But that process is not, that is a slow process.
so let me ask you this. If
That's one way of
and
doing it.
It's a little bit different, but we're still in the same realm when we're talking about enforcement. So if we come up with a city parking ordinance come wintertime in order for plowing,
Yep.
does that become a problem that we can't have anybody enforce that?
Ooh,
When you're talking about enforcement, to me, I'm thinking,
Hmm.
that question needs to be answered first, or why invest your time if you turn around and say, here, we've got 12 hours into this, we've created a city parking ordinance, for plowing and snow removal, but guess what? Now the sheriff's department says, well, that's not exactly right, and we can't go and do tickets. Why are we spending our time doing it?
Well, I think we still have a city ordinance on the books that restricts parking in the downtown area. And
It's not just downtown.
Yeah, we have a number.
but there's I think a 90-minute parking.
It's
provision.
2 hours. 2 hours on Wisconsin Street.
Okay.
Patrick and I talked about that before the.
I mean, that's
before
been on the
meeting.
books and has never been enforced. I mean, has anybody ever heard of somebody getting a parking ticket in
Where's
in
the
Grand
sign
Marais?
that
Patrick
tells me I
and-
can only park there for 2 hours?
There are 3 or 4 of them on downtown. Just nobody sees them anymore because nobody's even looking for them.
Are they really?
Yeah, there are actually 2 hour parking signs downtown. And
They-
I talked to
They've been here
Patrick.
since you've been.
I asked that very
Well,
same
I've lived
question.
here 50 years, so
So you haven't seen
That's
those
why I don't
things.
read 'em
Yeah, that's right.
You mean 37 years.
37.
So the
Good one, Jake.
I asked Mike that same question, and I asked him when was the last time somebody got a parking ticket in Grand Marais, and he kind of laughed and he said, "Well, when did we disband the city police force?"
Mhm.
And that was the last time that somebody got a parking ticket downtown.
It's not true.
Well, okay, he was exaggerating then, but it's not far from an exaggeration, We're still talking about many years, or else egregious violations that are getting ticketed.
So since we've circled around, created now this big conversation, I mean, it seems to me that what we should be doing though is having a conversation with our city attorney, with the sheriff, with Mike, and trying to figure out a mechanism that allows us to do enforcement that's effective. And whether it's within the confines of our existing code or a rewritten code, you still have to have an enforcement mechanism.
Right.
So I would suggest that we try to gather those parties together and at least start to address code enforcement in the broader sense that, how do we go about doing this if as a policy, we want these codes enforced? I mean, it seems to me that we do. These are on the books, that they're
Right.
rules of the city, and, I mean, unless we're willing to change that, I think we have an obligation to
Enforce them.
to do enforcement.
And for the record, I did talk to Pat about this specific situation, and his advice was to do an educational, attempt at trying to tell people, like, just to get the community to understand what it was, and to write them letters, to warn them about their violations. So I mean, that is what he suggested, and it came across as him seeming like he was not super enthusiastic about having to take enforcement against those things, but he also understands that that's why we have a contract with him.
Voluntary compliance is much easier
Is
and
much easier
cheaper
to do.
to
Yes.
deal with than trying to go and force somebody to do something that they don't want to do.
And if we do go down that path, though, we have to understand that then we're taking an acute solution to a very not acute problem, which is violations of city code, and then we're kind of setting ourselves up for a precedent, which I don't think is a terrible precedent, of having people bring up violations in code that then the city has to follow up on, which probably would not be a bad way of going through, revising the city code, or making sure that people in the community understand what the code requires. But it also is, it tends to be a bit labor intensive.
Appreciate your tolerance for my comments here, but I think that's always been the case. It's always been a situation
Yeah.
where people complain. It's always been a complaint-based system, as Mike Roth said at our last meeting. And then he does reach out and talk to people, and they generally comply. What we have here is a situation where a person is not complying to what used to be small town, let's all get along kind of pressure. Please don't do that. It's against the ordinance. Okay, fine, I'll stop. That's not what's occurring in this case.
Well,
in
this person actually did try to move the said trailer to a different part of the yard in the back, but because of the configuration, it did not work, both at the size of the yard and the size of the trailer. So they made that attempt at one point.
They have approached us. It was just the person who's complaining and the letters we got from them. And I don't know what can be done in that specific situation. I don't even know where this location is or who these people are. So I'm just saying, it's this system has worked for a long time now. And I think it will still continue to work that same way. And I think that to take out the sword of actual enforcement, which you can create through these discussions now and show the pathway to it, I don't think it'll have to come out a lot. I'm hoping not, because the town hasn't changed that much yet, has it? So I would hope that there would still be some proper behavior when people get the warning. But that's all.
Did you read section 42-28? Apparently you can dump your RV waste in your yard, as long as it's in your yard and not somebody else's yard, which is crazy. So anyway,
No person shall dump
Highlight
from
that
any
one for
trailer
whatever
onto
Well-
any property other than his own.
right, other than his
Maybe
own.
it's meaning your own sewer system, hopefully, right?
I would hope so.
I don't-
Except in
I
places
don't-
normally reserved for such
I can't
dumping.
imagine anybody who uses the
No
trailer would
reserve.
want that waste in their front or backyard
No,
when they
no, I
live
wouldn't
there,
think so
right?
either.
Yeah, it's fertilizer.
I don't think we're labeling RVers or trailer people that.
Boy.
1977.
Now, wait a minute,
Okay.
Anton, do you-
Yeah, right? Did you saw that too? The code, most of these codes are dated exactly 1977.
So they were having a similar conversation in 1976. A lot of trailers were popping up, something in 70.
No, they might
About a
have,
40-year
they might have
cycle.
rewritten the city code in '77, and you'll see probably maybe wholesale changes at that time.
That's when we
There was
had
another
locked, right?
recodification that was done in the early '90s, I think.
1998.
So you have a major, and so you'll see references to that recodification too.
So we have an issue here. What does the council think about ways to move forward? I mean, we have the opportunity to send letters. We have the opportunity to try and educate the public a little bit more about what the expectation is according to the city code. We have lots of options. You know, we also, I think that it would be frugal for us to start the conversation about updating the city code. Because obviously, I mean, this isn't the first conversation we've had about the shortcomings of the code, or the shortcomings in enforcement of the code. And I think the first step to actually getting that taken care of is to go through the code.
Well, and to know who's gonna be able to do the enforcement, that it's gonna, I mean, like you said, it's not high on the priority list.
Right.
Well, when does it get done? Does John get his ticket on a Monday, but then Steve doesn't get his ticket for 6 more months, and they happen to be friends, you know?
And I mean,
Fair is fair.
having some kind of policy regarding that is also, you know, that would be hand in hand. But you actually bring up the thing, like a really good point that makes me think that we need to address this in acute situations, because we've already discussed doing storm parking or like snow parking, snow emergency parking, so that the plows can get through and actually plow. Especially once we do Highway 61. And if we do that, then we need to have, you know, some kind of ability to enforce those things. Otherwise, that won't work.
Well, or some of your streets, being that I know who the person is, there is a particular street in town which was narrowed that people park on both sides of it, and it goes through by this much, and when the cars are parked wrong, can't get through. So said operator has said, not doing it, because I'm not taking out someone's car, and then the county's buying a new car. And has called city street department staff to say, here's why this one is not done. So that leads us to another problem as far as the city officials, when people call and say, why was it not plowed in front of my?
Because you, well, and
Might
we,
not have been them, it might have been the neighbor or somebody
yeah,
else.
exactly. Why would your
Well,
RV
I mean,
park?
can we,
Yeah.
I would, do I need a motion? I mean, I would say that, I think it would be, since, I mean, if Pat recommends it, obviously based on some conversation with Chris about this, just to make sure, but,
You don't need a motion, you can just instruct.
I mean, I would say that,
That's-
that seems, I mean, again, for the incident, I think for what is happening here, a letter, right? Like, it's been a complaint, and then I think the education side of it, right? Do we have to go down and try and find all 31, because what if someone's out camping for the weekend and we don't catch one, right? But like, I think the education side of it, but I think that there does need to be something should happen, right? I mean,
But I think in fairness, somehow we have to reach out, and whether it's every citizen in the city gets one, or it's an
That's what
ad
I
taken
mean,
out in the
like, yeah,
paper
yeah.
to say, here, I don't think you can, just send a letter to the one person that got brought up, but then skip the other 30, or what about the ones that Jonathan missed, like you said, that weren't there, that,
right, that's where I think the education, right, I agree,
Yeah.
like the education side of it, but I don't know, I obviously defer to Chris and.
there's your
You
next
guys
topic on WTIP conversation.
It'll probably happen. Yep.
But, maybe some sort of something in the paper stating this has been brought to our attention as a reminder.
This is what the code says.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think as well that that's probably the best way to start the conversation. As Todd so eloquently put it, the sort of enforcement, I think, is something that doesn't go over terribly well in Grand Marais, and I do understand that there are opportunities when that is an appropriate response. I'm just, I think we got to go through the steps of just like
Well, it makes it hard when it's like, well, why do I have to move mine? Because they've got theirs there, and I can.
That's just
the
it. I
same person
think
can
the
drive
sort of
around.
enforcement can work. I don't think any of us are any different. If the rule's applied to one, it's applied to all. If it's only going to be applied to one is where you have an issue,
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
you know? And I hate saying it that we have to tell everybody in the city, because I'm also one of those that when you have a rule, when you have a group of people, I'll take employees, you've got 100 employees and 98 of them follow the rules, 2 are missing out, and then you go and create another rule for the 100 people because you don't go talk to the 2, that's a thorn in my side, but
Right. Well, and that's just like, I mean, the same thing happened when we were talking about vacation rentals, you know? Like, the entire community had the opportunity to know about what was going on because we discussed it here in the city council meeting, but the people that got the letters were the people who were actually in violation, you know? And that was relatively successful.
Yeah.
I mean, it accomplished the gist of the ordinance's goal, I think. So, does that sound like we've got something to start with there?
Tim, do you have a problem with it?
No, I think, continuing that conversation at a higher level, I mean, with Chris and Pat, and I think we need to figure out how we're gonna go about doing this and then do it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is always, it tends to be reactionary, right? I
Right.
mean, that's just the nature of it, because, but,
And for me, that is largely why I bring up the conversation about
yeah, we've been.
going through the
talking.
city code, is because the council has been acting on a reactionary basis for complaints of code violations, and we don't have an answer. Like, a lot of times we haven't had that conversation about how to enforce it, about even why to enforce it, or why not. And
So-
that's what I'm
so-
talking about.
So what does it take to get, what does it take to get that going? I mean, besides us saying, I mean, well, it's a lot.
I mean, we
but-
could say we
I
want
mean,
to do it,
There
but
must be something, right? I mean, there must be some first step, and whether that's
Chris,
talking to Chris and saying, hey,
what does that look like, Chris?
So you guys are covering a lot of territory tonight.
That's because Mike isn't here to rein us in. We told him that.
You know, I mean, the discussion is good. I mean, you're talking about all the issues that go into this, and it fundamentally comes down to what kind of resources you want to dedicate to doing certain things. You have certain laws on the books. A violation of city code is typically a criminal misdemeanor, and so you've got 2 mechanisms for enforcement. You have criminal prosecution, and you have a civil process, both of which are designed to get compliance, because we don't just like to penalize people because it's fun. We want compliance with code. So we want to have ordinances on the books that are effective. We want to try and educate the public as to what those ordinances are, and we want to try and give the public an opportunity to comply. Most people, if told that they're in violation of a law and they get a letter from the city to that effect, are going to comply. It's really, as Kelly said, you get 2 out of 100 that maybe won't, and then you've got to look at other steps. Generally speaking, on some of these parking issues, that is really a law enforcement issue. The sheriff's department, if there are violations of the law and people complain about that, they should ticket. That is they are the law enforcement entity for the county, and at the end of the day, a lot of what you're talking about are law enforcement issues and the priorities that law enforcement is setting. And I get it, they're busy doing other things that maybe are more important than, doing traffic ticketing. The issues that you're talking about, even in larger cities, like Winona is an example. I mean, Winona has a parking officer, and that all they do is go around and ticket people. And it's because they've decided that they needed to have and put resources, and by resources I mean money, they put money towards enforcing those kinds of things. And I think that's what you have to consider here. Now, you know, in terms of the RV parking, you know, that's one issue. I mean, there are hundreds of other issues. I mean, just the zoning issues alone, like we've got people that have, you know, an old junk vehicle in their front yard. We've got people that have, you know, old truck tires and couch sitting in their front yard, you know, so we've got junk on their property. We've got, you know, an old burned down building that hasn't been dealt with. I mean, there are so many different circumstances that come into play. Each of those circumstances have a different mechanism for enforcement. Oftentimes, in most cities, the first step to enforcement is by law enforcement. It's ticketing, it's criminal prosecution, and it's designed to have a monetary penalty but gain compliance. If somebody is ticketed and they don't comply with the criminal process, then what happens is you get a hold of the civil city attorney and you say, hey, we got a property here and they've got junk strewn all over their property, and we gave them a criminal ticket violation, and they paid the violation and still have all sorts of other violations. Then we look at a different process, which is a nuisance abatement process, which involves letters from the city, probably a nasty letter from me at some point, telling them how I'm going to go after them, and then we come back to the city council. The council issues an order. We then have to go to court and get a court order to go onto this person's property. We hire a contractor. We remove all the junk, and we assess all the costs back to them. So I mean, there's a huge spectrum of different ordinance mechanisms here, and so that's why I said when I started out the call that you are talking about a lot of territory here.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if somebody, again, the simple matter is if people make mistakes or they don't know and they're asked to change it, you don't have to go to all that, right? You can clean up your junk, you can move your RV, you can do those things. I mean, there's a way we all want to act with each other in this town, and it isn't to feel threatened or, you know, that you can't communicate with each other. And so you shouldn't have to come to the fact where Chris is writing a nasty letter and there's, you know, I don't know, that's just, let's get the information out there, you know?
I mean, the immediate thing is that we can act on the information that we have right now, and that is that there are some violations with regard to this section of the city code. You know, I think the most immediate way to respond to that is to identify those parties, let them know that they're in violation, and let them know what the requirements of the ordinance are so that they can, you know, comply if you know, if possible, you know.
I think that sounds reasonable.
So then, if people have them parked on the street, does law enforcement have to get involved to find out, run the license plate and find out who it is and where they live? Just because something's in front of you, and
In
I'm
the ordinance, yeah, can't be parked anywhere.
Because I'm thinking there's others that have things, and I have a particular spot in mind that I don't want to get too in-depth to, but you don't know whose it would be in the place that it's parked, so therefore we're going to have to call law enforcement and ask them to get the information for us. Run the
That
plate.
is correct, because they're going to have, if they run the license plate on the DVS system, they have to have a law enforcement reason to do that.
Okay.
Oh, and we've got the ordinance number, so they can just list the ordinance number. Yeah, so I mean, I think Chris makes a really good point. Like we're talking about a lot of stuff. I do think that this is probably the most reasonable and rational way to move about it at this level, is simply just to ask people to come in compliance. And then once, if we see, if this is not successful at all, then we have to have that conversation. We have to have that conversation in a different way then. But I do think that we're required to have that conversation. you know, at this level and at other levels. So, does everybody,
Yeah,
what
let's
does
do
everybody
it.
think about that? Should
I'm
we,
good with that. I think it's a start. I think we'll find more things popping up.
I think you're right.
Well, and then just recognize the burden that that's gonna put on, you know, Mike and staff to gather that information and to work with 30-some property owners, and it's.
But
So I don't know how much
they're
work-
there, so we could start having more things come. That's
I mean,
where
it
we
better-
run into the issue is we have a book that has codes. There's more than this one, so
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that it's gonna take their time to
Yeah.
do this,
Right.
which means it's gonna take it away from something else
Other
that we're
things, yeah.
wanting them to do.
We're,
so.
yeah, exactly, and I think that that's important, you know, I mean, we have to acknowledge that this is a first step towards, you know, having the city actually be more involved in that kind of enforcement stuff, and I you know, I think that if Mike was here, I think he would be resisting this a fair amount.
well, I'm thinking circle the wagons. 20 years later, we'll have city policemen back in place again.
Well, I mean, if the city gets big enough, I think that would be an option,
Well, but
but,
if you don't do it now, and then now in a year, or 2 years, or 10 years, there's 50 or 60.
right,
when
then it
Yep.
becomes a
Jonathan
real problem.
looks like
Absolutely.
Tim, and he's still on the city council, driving around. I mean,
Well, I
then,
thought
then
Tim looked
now
like
you gotta.
Jonathan a year or two ago.
Well, that's what I'm
I
saying. It's gonna
did,
go the other way
just the
now.
stress.
Okay, so we'll move forward in that direction.
Could be you too, Anton.
Yeah.
And then we'll continue this conversation as is necessary.
Well, I think especially too, depending on who's here come January, I mean, I think that, I mean, I don't know, I think I don't know what it was, but it's something, I mean, something that happened pretty early on to when I got on here and when you first got on here that was talking about going into it, right? Not that we haven't done other things in the past 3.5 years, but that we haven't done anything on that.
Oh, and all the codes,
Yeah,
city
right.
codes.
It's, I don't know, I've read chunks of it here and there, but more as, you know, again, in a responsive manner based on something that I was wondering about or, you know, something
And maybe it's something that should go on the agenda, I don't know, once a month, once a quarter, that we pick something that maybe is more prominent than others to take a look at and revamp. You know, kind of like you set up a schedule and say, this is what we're gonna look at or review, and obviously you don't wanna do it every meeting, because I don't think any of us wanna be here for 4 or 5 hours every time, but are there some things that seem to keep coming to the forefront that, okay, maybe we should start revisiting, and like I said, make a schedule of reviewing these so that it doesn't become so cumbersome for whoever down the road. To start with, it's gonna be a huge undertaking, but somewhere down the road,
I
people are
think-
just gonna go, oh, look what we're reviewing this month.
well, especially from the planning commission, right? I mean, because the planning commission, there's all the zoning aspects of it, even beyond just the ordinances,
Mhm.
right? I mean, there's some difference, I think, right, between, and I mean, it's a whole, you know, so you're
Well,
basically
and
getting
there's-
twice the work.
Yeah, and the zoning ordinance hasn't been redone since the late 90s,
Yeah.
so 20 years since it's been looked at.
Constantly re-examining things.
And to do what Kelly is saying is somewhat along the lines of what I'm hoping we can do with the city code. The undergirding of that, like what's necessary to put in place before we can bring parts of the code to the city council in an organized way for consideration, is that we'd have to engage in a process. Like we would have to actually start a process that acknowledges that the city council is doing this in a structured way, and that we would. I think so.
I mean,
and we
don't-
would-
can't you, I mean,
well,
I thought part of what was slowing this up now that I think about it was the fact that we also hadn't had what are we working on, our vision, all of that, comprehensive plan, right? We learned about that at that deal,
Yeah.
it's like it had been since 1990 or something was the last time the comprehensive plan had been updated,
Yeah, I don't know who wrote that thing.
you know, and Tim wasn't here, so don't look
No,
And-
he wrote it.
at him. Really? Was it 90? But anyways,
Somewhere around there.
it was a long time, you know, and so that's where like, well, geez, we need to update this, because if we have this comprehensive plan, which was, right, there was community involvement in
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
And that is what's setting what we're shooting for with how our code is.
Mm-hmm.
So when that's there, now we have something to look at to try and look and see how those changes and do they reflect in what our comp plan is.
Right, and all I'm saying is that we aren't lawyers, and to have the code written in a way that makes it legal and
Well, right, we're not gonna actually
You know-
write it, I mean, but I'm saying like the review process, like sure, like absolutely community involvement, but that you don't want, like, well, maybe you do, I don't wanna ask people like, oh, whatever, because no, we're not all lawyers, right? Most people aren't lawyers in town, I would say.
Right.
So to then have.
I'm just
them-
saying we would need guidance in that process.
Yeah.
Right.
And that would be something that would be larger than the contract that we have with Chris at present.
Sure. Oh,
So,
yeah.
Well,
that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying.
Oh.
Maybe it's a contract, or not a contract, a conversation, excuse me, between Chris and Mike as to how would we maybe want to go about starting this process,
Mhm.
and moving it forward, you know, even as you say, a comprehensive plan. I don't think one should be done every 20 years, maybe every, I don't know, I'm thinking somewhere between 5 and 10. 10 would be closer, but things continue to change, as we know, very quickly.
Mhm.
And so, to me, everything, here's the numbers person, everything has to be, but you schedule things out. Like I said last week when we were talking about personnel and looking at job descriptions, you know what? Every 3 years, those should be reviewed, just to make sure that what you got going is really what's happening. And same thing here, I mean,
Because there's a shift of people,
Yep.
right? And so you don't know,
right.
Right.
so,
But putting systems in place for continuous review
Right.
allows whoever
right,
to then take the climate they're in and make those decisions.
right.
And for the record as well, the conversations that we've had about the comprehensive plan is that the comprehensive plan will be readdressed, you know, on every 4 to 5 years or something like that. So that
Awesome.
was the conversation that we had. So we're starting to move in that direction. You know,
Great.
there's lots of things, and I think there's a lot more that we can do to make those schedules more regular.
Mm-hmm. It's got to start somewhere.
Yep. Cool. Shall we?
Yeah,
Yes.
please.
Good?
Yes.
All right, so moving right along, so this item on the agenda is
We're not
titled...
moving right along. We are not.
We're long
The
past
opposite.
adjournment.
We're long past moving right
We're long
along.
past
Yeah.
moving right along.
So this next memo is titled golf course. As far as that concerned, the reason that this is on the agenda is to discuss the continual operations or the continuous operation of the golf course through whatever outcome might happen with the staffing up there. At this point, Parks Manager Tiersteg is in his words, and I think it's just fair, hoping for the best, planning for the worst. So that's not to be interpreted in any way, shape, or form other than it is the responsibility of the city and the Parks Department to plan for the worst contingency. So today, he and some of his staff went up to the golf course to ask questions, to take a look around, you know, just to kind of get some feet on the ground up there, and that's really all we can say about that situation at present. So this is not really a conversational piece. This is just an update from where we are with the plan for the continual operation of the golf course.
Have we had any more applications?
We went through the process of gathering applications. We had a number of good applicants. We interviewed applicants on Monday, and we have started the process of making an offer to a candidate. So that's where we're at with that. That process will take some time to unfold. So we're hoping to have a an item on the next agenda for approval for that
Thank you.
for that position. So
Great.
so that's pretty much all we have for that.
Okay.
And we will have more updates on that for the next meeting. So after that, moving right along to council and staff reports.
Wait,
Wait, Yeah.
What about?
Oh, these things, yeah. So the memos that we've got on our table. So this is something that this has been a conversation for a year and a half or something like that. Wayne Potratz is a pretty accomplished cast iron and bronze sculptor from the Twin Cities. He is an instructor at the University of Minnesota. He's a frequent visitor to Grand Marais. He's a very good friend of the art colony, and he has created this sculpture, which you see the picture of, that he wishes to donate. When he first had this discussion with the city council, he had requested that he and I and someone from the maintenance department, streets department, go walk around and find a location. And on the second page, you can see this is Boulder Park, and the proposal was to put it on the back side of some of these trees so that it would be kind of inconspicuous and kind of like someone had just pulled up off of a canoe trip and set it there, something for discovery. And he was excited about that concept as well, and not something that is, really bombastic and out in the vision for everyone. What he has identified is either a concrete slab or concrete anchors, which he has provided the schematics for, that the sculpture will be anchored to. And so that's what it is. It's about 10 by 7. And we have here an acknowledgement of the donation that we need to sign if we wish to accept this. And you may notice in this that there is the opportunity for the city to move this in the future as we see fit, if there is future development in Boulder Park. And so the infrastructure that would go in for this to be there would be pretty minor. We're talking about either concrete pillars in the rock or a 10 by 7 concrete slab, and that would be about it. So, any conversations?
Was the CEC involved in any of this at all, or no?
I
This was ongoing
mentioned
before?
this to the CEC quite a while ago, and they if I remember correctly, the conversation, they thought that this was pretty awesome.
Okay.
They really like Wayne. A lot of them know Wayne, and I think that the conversation, kind of squirreled away into, hey, how are we going to actually handle public art being installed around the city?
Mm-hmm.
And the CEC isn't quite ready to make that to weigh in on that decision yet, but this piece of art they are aware of.
Great.
It seemed that when they were here talking to us, that they had an interest, though, in the placement of public art and the locations for particular, art pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think this is great, I think it's a nice location for it down there, and, but I think if we really are wanting to work with that group, we should, in some kind of a formal way, let them know that this has been offered and this has been suggested as a location, just to get their concurrence or feedback to that, to make them feel that, we're not just going ahead and doing this stuff without any kind of involvement on their part, because I think that's what they're asking for, is to kind of let them be aware and make recommendations or suggestions, or, and I think we've all said, well, we're not
the experts.
well, yeah.
Sounds like this was started out, though, in place kind of before we had that verbal agreement with
Right.
them.
It's been going on for quite
Yeah.
a while, yeah.
And
So-
in the language of the resolution doesn't actually say where it would be located, just acknowledges it acknowledges the acceptance, and so that definitely leaves us the ability to acknowledge the acceptance of this sculpture, and then to refer that to the CEC for consideration of location. We could certainly do it that pathway as well.
Well, I would make a motion that we approve this resolution, and then refer it to the CEC so that they can provide us with some feedback if they so choose.
I'd second that.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion for resolution 2018-14?
I just want to add, we did discuss this at the park board and unanimously approved it.
So at the
Super.
park board, did they talk about him wanting to start it this weekend? No, okay.
So that's a
They
bit of
mentioned-
inside information, eh?
You mentioned end of the month.
Okay.
Is he really gonna start it this weekend?
That's why Dave wanted to push it to today's meeting, but, you know, it's up to you.
Well, I mean, if we acknowledge this and refer this to the CEC, I can get on the CEC ASAP. Like, I can send him an email tonight to say, hey, you've got your first thing. Let's take a look
Guess
at
what?
this.
You got 2 days.
And guess what? You've got 2 days to get it done. Man, then we're talking and we're gonna get results.
I think it's great, and it's nice to see it, because I know we talked about it, it seems like for 3 years or something. I would just say, I like the idea of the placement, and actually like the idea of like buried piers with some sort of anchoring points versus a concrete slab, because it would look more like exactly what, you know,
More
versus
natural.
more natural. So, and potentially easier to deal with if there was something else that were to happen versus a big
Just
monolithic
unbolted and-
slab. And
Yep. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, the motion is to accept resolution 2018-14, to accept the bronze sculpture entitled Camping at the Edge of Nature and Culture. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, so I'll send an email out tonight to the CEC to confirm their participation in this, and then we will mark that with an urgent sign.
So Chris, do we also need to do the acceptance, acknowledgement, and release as a motion?
The acceptance kind of just goes with the resolution.
That's what I
It's
thought.
literally just, I guess, something that we're giving to the donor, you know, that is just acknowledging we're accepting it at the time he provides it to us.
okay.
Okay. All right, so now, unless there's something else that we're adding to the bottom of the agenda, now it is time for council and staff reports. So,
All right,
John.
had a park board meeting, well, Todd's still here. We discussed, we hadn't seen a permit for Stars in the North yet, but we preemptively approved that permit, granted that it's similar to last year's. We'd still like to see that down there.
Yeah,
So, great.
no, yeah, I had filled it out, but it never got
Okay.
off my desk into the fax machine, so I filled out another one and he received it, I think, 2 days ago. So
Okay, but, so it should be good to go there.
thanks for the preemptive approval.
Yeah, so some fun.
can't do anything
Fun
else.
stuff.
Small town Minnesota nice.
Yeah. Ann and Mike from North House, they're interns that approached the park board with a collaborative project, kind of community service minded, that they would like to timber frame and rebuild the 2 pavilions or on Sweetheart's Bluff. The one
Oh.
down by the lake and the one up at the top, because the timbers are just falling
Right.
apart.
Yeah.
And they, all the lumber would come from Headstrom's. They're gonna do the cutting and the prefabrication at North House. Then they're gonna get volunteers to haul the materials in. The park will be responsible for demolition, roofing, and the platforms, because they're all open walls.
Mm.
And they said that their quote was about, I think, $3,600 for both of them. And Dave was estimating that the demolition, roofing, and rest of it to finish those 2, we could do both of them for around $5,000 or less. And those will, the prints or the plans will be done so we can review them in August at our next meeting. And then they would plan to have it built and up in October. And we all unanimously approved that, thought that that was a fun project. It goes hand in hand with, there's a new trailhead sign that's coming in that's got like elevation lines that looks nice. It's gonna be more of an official trailhead sign. So that plus the new pavilions are, it's just gonna kind of give that area a little bit of rebirth, and it all helps to address, you know, the concerns that it was kind of getting lost by the wayside a little bit, with some of the damage happening to the trees, and the thought is it'll look more inviting and nicer, and people will just have a little more
That's cool.
respect for it.
It's awesome.
So that's gonna be fun. We talked about the canoe, we already did that. The revenue are like 11% higher year to date than last year. So you might see that. All of it is because the deposits went from 40 or 25 to $40. So
Oh.
it just reflects that increase.
I was
Over
gonna
the
say.
course of the year, it's gonna even out.
What are your numbers?
Mhm.
But the overall is up about 3%, and tent sites are just 11% over last year. So everyone's up. Everyone's getting tent sites.
People don't know in June it's not warm here, do they?
Yeah.
Oh.
So
I think that our numbers, I mean, it's kind of funny if you, at the end of the season, Dave will come and he'll give us like the numbers for the park for the year, and it is shocking to see, you know, you're talking March is nothing, April is nothing, May is like meh, like a
Just
little teeny
pace.
bit. June is like a little bit more than that, and then right starting in July, it's just like Shazam, and then August is Shazam, and September is, and then October is like a little bit less, and then
Yep.
and then it just there's nothing, and then it just goes completely back to nothing. So it's really interesting to
I
look
worked
at
there
those.
for 9 years,
Oh my God!
and did the park board for 3.
And it has been impressive, though, that there has been growth, and even in the July and August periods, you know, when you think you're at your max, but there's even a higher level, so, and that's been through some of the adjustment to the rates and that kind of stuff.
So, and then the only other thing is tomorrow we're meeting with DNR to go over the lakeside access project.
I'll be there for that.
So
That's
Jay,
exciting.
you're gonna be there too?
Yep.
Where's
So
that? Where's that?
that's gonna be at the rec park.
Park, at the rec park hall. Yeah.
Is there something here tomorrow night with the dinner?
Yes, there is also. I can talk about that.
Okay.
So that is it.
But that's not city. That's not a city issue.
Right,
That's
no, I know.
like we're
I just
just
saw
letting
it
them
at
use our
City Hall.
space.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. You're up.
We EDA meeting last night, and let's see, the biggest updates are so the housing out at on 2nd Street, the Marais housing. One house is totally done. The second one is mostly done. And then the road and sewer, water, and utilities for the expansion for the next 4 is getting closer. Of the, there's been 20, I believe the number's 23, it's either 23 or 28 applicants for those first 4.
4 homes.
And so they've been able to tour the homes and then are working to try and figure out who gets what. So, you know, I guess the fear of being vacant is
Not a fear.
not a
really.
fear. I didn't think it would be, but, you know, you never know. So that's great. There's been some issues with, I think part of it has to do with construction on Highway 61, similar to the issues they had with getting the houses for the Marais project into town because of some issues out in western Minnesota and the wide loads and construction zones and whatnot, and seasonality problems with weight limits. They had to reconfigure how shipping would happen on coming up Highway 61 for the Lutzen buildings. But then there was also, they're waiting for final approval on the Army Corps wetland issues up there, and they still say sometime in July, I think, is what they were saying, that's when they're gonna start hopefully getting road work going up there.
For Lutzen.
July or August, yeah. For the Lutzen, and there's, for the Lutzen, the first of what is hopefully many down there.
And what's the first phase, number of first phase units?
I think it's either 8 or 16, you remember? I don't know why you would remember, but,
Because Kim knows everything.
Where's
Well, I
that
know,
gonna be,
Kim
on
doesn't
Mink
know
Ranch
everything.
Road?
no.
No,
Just
it's
past Arrowhead.
Right past
Yeah,
Arrowhead.
Oh,
yeah, just to the west there.
Required some property,
Yeah.
just to the west of Arrowhead.
I'm trying to, I should remember how
I
they.
think it was 16, but
I thought it was 16 as well, but I thought there were, it might be 16. I thought there were 4 sets of 4. So-
sounds right to me.
Yeah. But anyway, there is stuff happening there, and they're trying to work through. There's most of the funding has come through the different organizations, and obviously the EDA and the county. There's some issues they're trying to work out with a little bit of shortfalls, mostly on estimates versus bids, and how those play out with availability to start. So, and Bruce Block came by to talk about what he's got going out. That's called Village North, I guess. The old Tom Tabota and some of those things.
Go for cabin.
Yeah, but is
Go
it
for it,
called
man.
Village North?
Not Tom
Go for
Tabota,
cabins.
though. Go for cabins.
Well, I know, but that's where he got
He
the
took
building.
That's where you got the
Some of
building.
the-
Okay, I see what you're going for.
yeah.
So his issue is not, finally after waiting almost a year to get the buildings moved. Apparently, when they did that, they like sheared off all of the main plumbing, like sewer coming out of that. And then in doing that, it like cracked all of the vents going up for each unit. And there's actually 9 units in that, so he's trying to go through and fix all of that. And he's coming back at the next meeting with a little bit more information for us as far as what he's looking for, because he was seeking help on that in funds. And we all said it's great what you're doing, but we need more information. So he's going to get together with Marais and with Pat Campanero and from the SBDC and come back and talk to us again about that. And yeah, Superior National had their grand opening celebration, which I guess was a good turnout. And all 27 are open now. There was a delay because of all the winter kill, but they were able to get the canyon course open in time for the grand opening. And the numbers are, considering June was like 40% wetter than last June, and like the numbers are better than what the budgeted rounds were, despite the weather. So, we're obviously hopeful that continues to crank along, and all that expansion is, appreciated and utilized. So I think that's, I don't know, once you guys talk, I'll probably think of something else.
It's usually the way it goes.
Question about the business park. I know that there have been a couple, lots that were kind of, in
Yes.
the process.
Yes.
Anything more?
Yes. The property that was the top would be the northwest corner. That's the largest lot in the business park, was bought by Gary Nisgoda and his partner for their company. And the snowmobile trail bisects the property almost in half. And so they're working through that. The easement, there is no easement. It's just that they rerouted it when the business park was built to go up and through, but it was never utilized, and the old original was just continuing to be used. So they're working that out right now and just getting that squared away. And then there is somebody, actually I just texted some engineering information off to them today on engineering contacts, because they're trying to figure out, they have 3 lots and they're actually looking at the owner occupied sites just north of where the vet clinic is up there. And they are just trying to narrow down between the 3 based on some conversations with an engineer and they'd been talking to some bigger engineering firms, and I had sent along a place that we had used that was more reasonably, do a good job and pretty quick turnaround, and it meets the stormwater requirements that the county wants to see, to make sure there's no more troubles up there. So yeah, that when he was back or they, I don't know if it's a man or woman, when they were back today, and meeting with Mary and walking the properties again. So we expected that there would be an offer made on one of those by our next meeting, if not before.
Cool.
So that's great.
Good.
Thank you, Tim.
Tim?
At the planning commission meeting last week, we had, not only this discussion about code enforcement and these trailer issues, but we also had the conversation about the lodging in the downtown district that we've been, kind of dealing with for a while here. And we had some I think some good discussion, and I think we kind of ended the discussion with the idea that Mike was going to bring back some language to the commission at our next meeting in August, that we would then hopefully be able to provide final agreement to, and you can add in anything you might want, because Todd and I had a little difference of opinion here, so you might perceive this a little bit differently than I do, but I think the outcome, I think we can probably agree on that we directed Mike to come back with language that we could then agree to put out for a public hearing and start to gather that, engage that public process that we think is important. There's a lot of, I think, ideas and opinions kind of floating around right now about lodging in the downtown district, and they're not necessarily consistent with each other, but it's our role as a planning commission to kind of gather that in, and so I think that we would expect that would happen after our August meeting, and see some kind of public engagement process begin shortly thereafter.
Are there any results back from that questionnaire? Or
Oh, there were results from the questionnaire, and I agree.
They got
Patrick,
quite a few responses from what I
Patrick
understand.
probably can speak to that better than, 'cause since he was the one that dealt with, interviewing individuals and compiling that information. But, there were responses kind of, for and against, but I think, what it showed is that there was a lot of interest in the subject or the issue, and I think when we put together language, I think the idea is that, and Mike stressed this, is not to just have a public hearing, but to engage a public process that really involves getting people to kind of weigh in, and not wait till the last minute where you advertise a public hearing before the planning commission, and whoever gets here to speak their piece kind of is
The one that's here.
yeah. And so our hope is that we can get a much broader involvement from the community, downtown community, and the community in general. So
Cool. Anything else? Wait till you remember it.
I might not remember it till next month.
No, that's fine.
We'll be back.
We did make a motion that time was of the essence in this discussion, because currently there are more regulations on vacation rental potential in the downtown zone, and that's made some people nervous. So we want to make sure we move as quickly as we can, but still have a good public process. And it's mostly, I think the impression I was given from the people that were present there was that, and Patrick, maybe you can correct me on this, but is that from the discussions with the business community members downtown, that there is interest in putting in place some form of regulation in place of where there isn't some now. And to what level that gets to is where the conversation will steer us. It's concern about critical volume of retail.
Yeah.
If you lose too much retail, if you have too many blacked out streets, not enough windows or doors to walk through, then what do you have anymore? So this is, it's a legitimate concern.
I think some of that goes back to our discussion on Monday
Yep.
as we were having a vision.
Yep. Kelly?
YMCA board did not meet in June. We will pick up again now in July. So I don't have anything.
Cool. As Jonathan alluded, tomorrow the DNR will be in town, so we'll be sitting down with park staff to talk about the Grand Marais water access, and tomorrow afternoon. And then tomorrow evening, the city is lending the DNR this space to have a public hearing on the Gitchigami Trail section from Cut Face to the edge of Grand Marais. There is some contention around some of the locations of some of the bridges. I know very little about the DNR's process for that. That is something that is beyond the jurisdiction of the city. It was several city residents and community members brought their concerns to me, and so then I contacted the DNR and told them, hey, it's probably be a good idea for you to do a public meeting up here. They put it together for this Thursday, so I'll be attending that.
Do you know what their process is, and once they receive that, response from the community, how they even deal with that?
I have no idea.
I mean, obviously, this whole engineering process has happened kind of in a vacuum, and now they're releasing those end results.
I think that they would disagree. I think that the DNR would say that it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened through following their process. And what their process is and what the expectations that the council and this community expect, or that we've set up for our community to expect about the transparency and the conversation, are a bit above what their process requires. So that I'm not certain exactly what their process is, and I don't want to be putting words into their mouth. I'm going to be going to the meeting tomorrow night to learn, just like everybody else is. So
What time does that start?
that starts at 5.
And it's not a public hearing, it's just a public information.
I think it's just information.
meeting.
I think that the way they're going to do it is they're just going to have information out. People are going to come and mill about and take a look at pictures, and they'll have staff members here who are going to talk about it with people who are interested. And it's not going to be like a sit down and we'll lecture you kind of thing. That's what I understand. So we'll see what happens. On Monday, we all got together for a work session to discuss the future of City Hall and the liquor store. We have been charged with asking people around town what they think about potentials for the future location of the liquor store and City Hall. I've started asking people already, and the Downtown Business Coalition meets next Wednesday, the 18th, and Mike is going to attend that and is going to ask them what they think about it. Let's see, what else do I got here? There's a couple of things. I've been starting to get emails from people regarding the potential switching out all the meters to automatic reading meters. Some people who are concerned about that, so it might not be a bad idea for us to put out some information about that to the PUC. I will forward that on to the PUC as well. And the Library Financial Committee is working on budget stuff, as they always do about this time of the year. I think they're probably closing in on their yearly budget, and then I went to a Coastal Waters meeting with a different segment of the DNR, who they basically sat down with a bunch of people who have interest in coastal waters, both the Lake Superior coastal water and inland lakeshore waters, and asked us what our concerns are to gather information. And so I thought that was a very good thing for them to gather. There were some good things said at that meeting as well. So I think that's about it for me. Kim, do you have anything else?
I do not.
Patrick? It is 8:15. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Chris,